Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Brandis Friedman. Nick Blumberg has the evening off. Mayor Brandon Johnson just celebrated 2 years in office. He reflected on changes to policy and his personal life.
This is so humbling for us. To be able to serve the working people of this city has been the joy and honor of our life.
Violent crime is down and the migrant crisis is fading from the spotlight. But other challenges have emerged, like a worsening financial picture and federal funding threats.
We need Democrats who won't flinch, won't fold, won't forget what we're fighting for.
Daniel Biss jumps in the race to replace outgoing Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
The administration seeks to jeopardize readiness for disasters and safe roads, to try to force Illinois law enforcement officers to shift their focus away from addressing serious crime in our communities in order to instead do the federal government's job of civil immigration enforcement.
And Illinois joins a coalition of states suing the Trump administration over withholding federal dollars from states with sanctuary status. Meanwhile, Chicago gets a population boost, reversing a previously shrinking trend. The Supreme Court hears arguments on birthright citizenship, possibly reshaping what it means to be American. And not even severe weather could rain on Beyoncé's parade as the star kicks off 3 shows at Soldier Field. All right, so let's giddy up with our Week in Review panel. Joining us now are Jake Sheridan from the Chicago Tribune, Carrie Shepard from Axios, WTTW's own Patty Wetley, and WBBM's Rob Hart. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Let's get right to it. So, Mayor Brandon Johnson, he had a big week, officially 2 years in office as mayor. Jake, what is he touting for his first 2 years?
You know, I think the mayor touts his support for labor, for working people more than anything else. Over and over again, he says he's, the best mayor for workers in all of America. But one thing that really stuck out to me in this kind of media tour he did, marking his 2 years in office, are some of the apologies that he made. He said that he needs to do a better job of communicating with Chicagoans and of communicating with aldermen too, to get his message across and to explain to people why some of the bolder visions that he has are needed in this city.
He says, he's sort of doing good work, but he just needed to tell everybody, hey, everybody, look at all the good work we're doing. But what were some of his missteps? What didn't go his way over those 2 years? Some
of the bigger things, you think of the Bring Chicago Home referendum. I think there was maybe a failure to communicate his vision. He didn't really get in that race. And there's certainly been a struggle to communicate with aldermen. That's what they say, at least, that they often feel left out. So I think that's where a lot of the budget struggles in the last year came from.
Carrie?
Yeah, he struck a tone of, excuse me, of humility, but it was sometimes, especially in his interview with Jake and his colleague Alice at the Tribune, that it was a little bit one of those, like when you do a job interview and it's like, what was your worst quality? I'm too much of a perfectionist. Like it was a little like, I worked too hard. It was a little like, I've done all these great things, which he has said to reporters before. I've done all these great things. It's on you all to get the message out to Chicagoans that I'm doing all these things for everyday Chicagoans, getting rid of sub-minimum wage, et cetera. But he did accept some responsibility that maybe there's some problems with his own messaging on that.
What do we see as his biggest challenges going forward?
I think the biggest thing is going to be dealing with budget cuts from Donald Trump, but another thing he's going to have to contend with is rising political pressure here in Chicago. We reported last week that there's a dark money PAC that's raised $10 million to oppose the mayor and to fight in the city council. That's going to be a big deal as we get closer to elections. Aldermen are going to be aware that that group's out there, that it might slap people who are siding with the mayor too much.
Has he learned anything? Has he demonstrated that he's changed his approach over the last couple of years?
I think they have worked harder to communicate, certainly with reporters, and I think they've worked harder to communicate directly with the public as well. As for whether the policy direction will change, I think that remains to be seen.
He has not explicitly said if he will seek re-election, although a lot of us can probably guess, though he remains unpopular among Chicagoans, with an M3 Strategies poll from earlier this year showing a nearly 80% disapproval rating among residents. Rob, do you think a second term is a possibility for the mayor?
I would not rule that out. There is a non-zero possibility, and the reason why is that you need somebody to run against him. And even though you have the money out there to support an opponent, if that opponent were to make him or herself apparent, I think the nature of the job, and the mayor touched on this in the interview too, is that it's a different mayor's. The mayor of Chicago is a different job than it was 30 years ago. And the Chicago machine, even though it had many, many, many problems, and there have been books written about it, it was an organizing principle that got all of the stakeholders on the same page. It made it easier to be the mayor because made it easier to just get everybody together at the same time. That has since broken down, and politics in the city of Chicago are changing. The stakeholders are changing, the coalitions are changing, and regardless of who wins the mayor's office in 2027, he or she or Mayor Brandon Johnson will have to contend with that. And maybe a lot of challengers who could say, yeah, I would beat him in an election, would say, do I really want this job?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like the dog that chases the ambulance. Like, what are you going to do with it when you get it?
I mean, would he be coming out on this like 2-year tour if he wasn't thinking about running? He's got to be like making his case for 2 years from now.
Patty, any thoughts on why he's so unpopular?
I think that there's just this zeitgeist out there of everybody's upset about everything. And, you know, like everything is kind of trickling down to the city level. Things that are happening at the national or the state level, it all kind of comes down to the local level. And even if it's not his fault or the city's fault for something, that's where people are going to still feel the most frustrated. You're the most frustrated what's happening on your street or in your neighborhood. It doesn't really matter who's causing the chaos. It's where it comes down to, and that's kind of where it stops for a lot of people. And I think there's just overall frustration.
Yeah, big target, easy to direct your disappointment.
Rob mentions the machine, and like we like to say, oh, we hate the machine, but actually a lot of people liked the machine because they thought it got stuff done. And the issue that you mentioned with the mayor is there's a little bit of like, stop airing your dirty laundry, secure the votes with council members before you get to the council meeting, and don't show everyone how the sausage is made. So.
Right. I mean, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Because
Correct.
like we complain about that sausage getting made in the back smoke-filled room also.
It's tricky though. In the last year, there has not been a lot of sausage made. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
they've really struggled to pass legislation.
But I think
too.
that is the thing where nobody wanted rubber stamp, but by the same token, when you have fights over votes, then again, there's that logjam and things aren't getting done, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, you don't want that. Any idea, Rob, I don't know if you can speak to this, but like have we seen any other mayor have favorability ratings this low?
Geez, that's a very good question.
You gotta go back, don't you?
If you like in the history of Chicago or in the history of America?
In the history of Chicago.
I mean, I would say Dalton's second most famous, Tiffany Henyard. She had an uphill battle too, but that was for entirely different reasons. But I just think that the nature of, and the mayor touched on this in his interview, and that is, you asked him, Jake, you know, what's the difference between your tenure in office and 40 years ago when Mayor Washington was in office? And 40 years ago, you had to go through columnists. You had to go through Mike Flannery. You had to go through Dick Kay. You had to go through Andy Shaw. And now it's all taking place on social media. And the process of watching the sausage being made, you can now watch it being made and see the compromises and decide you hate them. So even though the sausage is being made, you're angry as a voter or as an observer that one thing or two things were taken out, and those are deal breakers to you. So the art of compromise, which everybody likes and everybody says they want to see, when the thing that you like is taken out of a piece of legislation, when it reaches a finished form, you're angry about it. So I just think the whole nature of governance, and this is everywhere. Look at the New York-centric media. Everybody hates the mayor of New York. Everybody's mad at the mayor of San Francisco.
We don't live there.
Everybody's mad at the mayor of Los Angeles. Like you're just mad at the person in power. So that's part of the dynamic that exists today. But at the same time, though, I think part of Mayor Brandon Johnson's problem, as Jake pointed out, it was self-inflicted. There was some on-the-job learning, and he suffered for that.
So let's talk about the Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss, because he's announced that he is running for outgoing Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky's seat in Congress. Jake, what is he running on? What do we know?
You know, I think he wants to, as a lot of Democrats here in Illinois have articulated, be a fighter against the Trump government, against Donald Trump's agenda.
Yep. Remind folks why his name might be familiar if they don't live in Evanston and he's not your mayor. From that time he ran for
governor
yeah.
in 2018, and then before that he was a state senator, which ironically State Senator Laura Fine, who also is in the race for Schakowsky's seat, actually took Daniel Biss's seat in the state Senate. Did you get all that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I know you
I'm
did.
following,
You're
yes.
following. You live in Evanston, you know. So people would remember from that. And yes, he ran in 2018, and he lost, of course, to J.B. Pritsker in the primary, who went on to be governor.
Right, distant second he came in that time. So as you mentioned, competition so far is State Senator Laura Fine of Glenview, who replaced him in the Senate, blah, blah, blah. But also progressive media star Kat Abugazela. Any idea how crowded this race might get, Carrie, Rob?
I mean, I don't know that it's going to get much more crowded than it is. To Jake's point, you said, what is he running on? He's very progressive, but I think that the Democrats have been very honest and candid that we need younger folks to represent us. Schakowsky and Durbin are legends in what they've done, and they've done great work. They're both older. They're 80 or 80 something. So everyone has said we need a little fresh blood in there. On the national side, Democrats have taken a beating for being a little asleep at the wheel, from the past election. So, I mean, I think he's trying to run on this idea that we're younger, we're going to fight harder, we're not going to let Trump step all over us. So we'll see if that.
We'll see, yeah.
It's an interesting district.
It is an interesting
I did
district.
a little research. There's only been like 3 people who've represented it
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the last
yeah.
60 years.
Going back to the
Like,
40s.
You get this
Jan
job,
and-
you keep
You
it.
keep it.
Jan
Yeah.
and Sid Yates going back to
That's it.
1948, except for that one time in the early 60s when a Republican won and then said, to heck with this, I want to be a judge. And then Sid Yates was back. Sid Yates was back.
Wow, okay, and then Schakowsky until now, obviously. So Governor J.B. Pritsker, he also signed an executive order blocking the federal government from obtaining personal health data related to autism, making Illinois the first state to do this. Carrie, what prompted Pritsker to take that action?
Well, as we know, HHS, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr., he has made this quite a big point for his administration now. And even before he was in the role of secretary, he has been pretty vocal about how he's anti-vaccine. He says that vaccines cause autism, which, a lot of autism groups say is incorrect language. It further stigmatizes people with autism spectrum disorder. So there's pushback on that. But, this is also Pritsker and Illinois saying it's overreach by you. And we want to make sure that Illinois residents are not susceptible to whatever thing you're planning to do with this data. Of course, HHS says we are practicing all safety protocols, but what about folks who get Medicaid or Medicare, that the federal government could have access to that? So there's a lot of pushback from advocacy groups and, of course, the governor as well.
Illinois has expanded access to PrEP. That is, of course, the medication that can help prevent HIV infection. Carrie, back to you. How exactly is PrEP being made more accessible?
So PrEP now, you can get it for people who need it, who obviously qualify for it. You can get it with a prescription from a pharmacist. So you don't have to necessarily go to a doctor to get it. There was, there was a law actually that was passed in 2022. And then training has been being implemented, and this is like a standing order that the head of the Illinois Department of Public Health, IDPH, they are it's considered that they are allowed to say, okay, now, pharmacists can distribute PrEP. This is significant too, because as we've seen is that the federal government, the Trump administration, has been restricting a lot of funds, NIH funds that, go to HIV and AIDS research. I've reported on this in the past. So, the folks I talked to said this is a really big deal because this is about accessibility. This is about making, not everybody has the access to get to a doctor, to get a prescription. So the goal being that there will be, they will access PrEP sooner and maybe a little easier.
What do we know about how HIV infection rates are trending lately?
They consistently, for the last probably more than a decade, they tend to hit Black and Latino men harder. This disproportionately hits them. They have been going down, probably because of the prevalence of PrEP, hopefully. But that's a really big concern for people in the community who are worried about these federal funding cuts, especially people who have grants, who are studying, how HIV is transmitted, how about accessibility. They're very concerned that the numbers are going to go in the other direction. I had one researcher tell me we're on the precipice of curing HIV, and this could set us way back.
That's
pretty stark.
That's pretty stark, absolutely. City of Chicago this week announcing that it is committing $7 million in raises for early childhood education workers. Rob, give us a sense of what this might amount to for child care workers.
Now, this is staggering. Now, I say this as somebody who is married to someone who is the director of early childhood at a school in the Chicago area, so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. But if you work in early childhood education, the average salary is $36,000 a year. Now, think about this. Someone who works in early childhood education, this is someone who lays the building blocks for your child's educational foundation.
And
helps
so
them
much
to
learning
recognize
in those first 3
sounds,
years.
helps them to sound out letters and learn to read and learn basic math. And the fact that you're making $36,000 a year, any little bit helps, and also it builds up early childhood programs that already exist.
What are the challenges that early childhood education is facing right now?
Well, I would say right now one of the big challenges is that it's just getting kids up to speed and getting them socialized, because there was definitely an impact during the COVID-19 education years, whether it's virtual school or trying to see how people were sounding things out through masks. There are numbers now that show there was some learning loss involved in that, and getting kids back on track, but also just making sure that kids have that foundation starting at age 3 or 4. Like the old days of kindergarten starts when you're 5. Like that's far down the road now.
That's
like you start. There's pre-K, there's preschool, there's kindergarten. Like that's part of your educational evolution.
Yeah, I mean, and early education folks, they're also facing the same fear of funding cuts as well, particularly with Head Start, which is an education program for low-income children, and they are fearful that Head Start will be on the chopping block. So far, not yet. Pritsker, though, he is also set to testify on Capitol Hill next month over the state's immigration policies. Now, Illinois is suing the federal government, along with 19 other states, over federal funding being withheld because of that sanctuary status. Rob, how is the saga going?
Well, this is, again, this has been ongoing since January, and this goes back to the issue that we had on day one of the second Trump administration, which was the Congress appropriated these funds. Legally, this money is already supposed to go out. You can't sit there and say, psych, we're pulling it back because you're not doing what we want. And this was not a fight that was had during the first Trump administration, even though it was something that had been talked about. But like all the other hundreds of legal issues that have been going to the court since January 20th, this is another one that's going to probably make its way to the Supreme Court.
We also know Chicago had a population boom this past year. Jake, to what can we attribute this growth?
Yeah, so Chicago was 7th in the country this year in overall population gain. And what the demographers we talked with said is that has a lot to do with people who were immigrating into Chicago, into the United States, including some of the folks who were bused up from Texas to Chicago. But also, it was people moving to Chicago, too. There wasn't demographic data shared in this data set, so it's a little hard to tell, but that's what we expect right now.
At the same time, so the Trib editorial board, of which you are not a part, criticized the mayor for celebrating this population increase, but a couple of years ago decrying, the crisis that happened, and basically calling him out, saying, well, you can't have it both ways, which I found interesting. And I'm like, do they have a point here? But the immigration crackdown that the Trump administration is working on right now, Jake, do you think that will hurt some of this progress?
Yeah, so that's another thing that we heard from experts, is that the crackdowns on immigration will probably stop people from moving into cities. A lot of people who come into cities in this country are immigrants who are coming here to find work and play important roles in the city. So it might hurt this population growth that is really important to our city.
Right. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments yesterday over birthright citizenship. President Trump tried to put an end to that, of course, with his executive order, one of many. Carrie, fill us in on this one.
Oof.
Where do I begin?
Yeah, this is interesting because most people didn't think this would make it to the courts. There are these scholars, these legal scholars, who call it this obscure argument, and that is that Trump had said something about, no, that amendment was meant for slavery, for slaves who were not born here, they are allowed to become citizens. But no, if you're born in the U.S., which is as long as, that is how it's been, interpreted for however long, hundreds of years, whatever. And as long as you were born in the U.S., you are a citizen. And now they're trying to say, no, this is not the case. This all is part of the theme we're all talking about. This is the Trump administration's continued sort of assault on immigration and the immigrants who are coming here. And, the birthright is just another example of this.
Rob, if Trump's executive order holds up, what would that mean for lots of people who are not born in this country but live here?
Well, I think the first thing is based on the way the Supreme Court justices were listening to the arguments this week. They seemed very cool to that idea, to the idea of doing away with birthright citizenship entirely. One thing, though, that they were a lot more amenable to, which was this idea of that one federal judge could not issue a nationwide stay on an executive order or a law that has been passed by Congress and signed into law by the president, which is an interesting piece of legal maneuvering because that has bedeviled presidents, Democrats and Republicans over the years. And one would imagine that if a Democrat is elected president in 2028 or at some point in the future, 2032, the Supreme Court will say, there'll be another case, and the Supreme Court will say, oh, we can issue stays again, that's fine. So that's something to watch as well.
Okay. Boeing reached a tentative non-prosecution agreement with DOJ, Department of Justice, there are reports anyway, over the fraud case related to the two fatal 737 MAX crashes in 2018 and 19, killing 346 people. Carrie, how are people reacting to this news, particularly the families of those who died in those crashes?
Exactly, not very well. They are saying that it's an assault on the families and the victims of people who were, I think, in those flights in 2018 and 2019, Ethiopia, I think the other one was maybe, yeah, Indonesia.
Yes.
And, this is just a string of what Boeing's been dealing with. And the DOJ has not confirmed that they're agreeing to the settlement. And basically what would be, if they didn't settle this, it would say that Boeing was a felon, essentially, because they would have said that they, lied to regulators. But that, people who are seeking justice from the Department of Justice, who are the families of these victims, feel like it sort of cheats them.
Yeah, a lot of complicating factors at work there. Patty, let's talk about trees, because the Park District has plans to take in. I know, right? My apologies. It was a hard turn. Park District has planned to take inventory of the amount of trees in the parks.
Yes.
Why are they counting trees?
Well, Morton Arboretum is administering a $1.3 million grant. The Park District is going to take about 3 years. They're outsourcing this work, but as we've seen with recent storms, having a healthy tree canopy is very important. And if you don't know the number of trees you have, what species you have, and especially how healthy those trees are. How many are large trees? How many are small trees? How many are invasive species? This is all really important to know how to manage it going forward. And they need to, much like the city has been trying to do with its parkway trees, create an overall management plan for, do we need to get on a pruning schedule? Do we need to add more of this species? Plans have changed a lot since a lot of our parks were formed and their trees were planted. There's a lot of probably non-native species out there. We want to get more native trees in. You need more trees of different ages, and you need to make sure that you're not going to have them falling down in large storms.
And to that effect, of course,
Yes.
we know there were some storms last night, delayed the Beyonce concert by 3
she
hours.
went on.
Of course, that show is going to go on. But tell us a little bit about the damage, Patty. How does it look?
There's a big tree that's down right outside across the street
I
from
saw
WTTW.
that one, yes. I'm like, that does not look good.
I mean,
Be careful
preliminary
going home.
reports were 700 trees, but that was just of last night. I imagine when people woke up today, there was a lot more. The city crews, to their credit, got to work right away, getting the ones off of the street. Like, there might still be debris, but they're not mostly blocking streets. Cook County Forest Preserve had its crews out so that no trails were blocked. But again, it just points to, if we're going to have more of these storms, we've had derechos, we've had tornadoes. The ones that I saw down, those were crushing cars. That's a lot of damage, and you have to start thinking, are we going to be seeing more of that? And so that's where the health of these trees becomes so important. Making sure that they're pruned, making sure that they're taken care of and are as healthy as they can be. We're putting a lot of sticks in the ground, but like we have to take care of them.
Have to know
Yes.
and have to have a sense of how many of them we have.
Yes.
Okay, well, we are out of time. That is it for Weekend. I know. Thank you, everybody. Don't worry, we can keep talking. But my thanks to Jake Sheridan, Carrie Shepard, Patty Wetley, and Rob Hart. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Week in Review is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, and Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that is our show for this Friday night. With the weather warming up, be sure to check out our summer festival guide to help you figure out your weekend plans. That's, of course, at WTTW.com/festivals. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend, everybody. Okay, so the sky.
That's the limit.
That's a good one. Thank you.
They're going to be good, I think.
Yeah.
I think that they're going to be really
So
good.
lure me to a game. I am
I was
ashamed
lured
that I
last
haven't
year.
gone.
I was gonna say, you
I
were
know.
luring me for
I
it.
need to go.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just didn't put it on my
When
list of
tickets
priorities.
get hot,
Tickets
then I
get
worry.
hot. Tickets are
that
hot.
I'm
They're
not gonna get
playing
one.
tomorrow against the Fever, of course, Caitlin Clark, Caitlin Clark. I think it's the season
the Angel
opener.
I think
Yeah.
it is.
And Angel Reese, I'm
Angel
sorry.
Reese,
Yes,
thank
you're
you.
absolutely
And the
right.
Camilla Cardoso.
Yes, of course.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that serves the needs of clients in the Chicago area and throughout the nation.